all started with just the passion of I loved bodybuilding. I started bodybuilding I started lifting weights when I was like 8 or 9 years old, and always, growing up as a child, especially we're like the same age, right? So coming from our
25?
generation, yeah, I'm 25. Yeah.
Oh, perfect.
So coming from that generation, in the 80s, growing up as a kid, um, everybody who was aspirational. Everybody was all your action stars, everything. Think back to the cartoons.
Yeah.
G.I. Joe, they were jacked, He-Man was jacked. All the movie stars was Stallone was doing all the Rambo movies, and you had Arnold, who was like the biggest action star. And man, it was just so appealing and so cool to me as a young kid. Like, yeah, that's what I want to do. That's what I want to look like. And not knowing anything about the sport of bodybuilding, just knowing that, like, man, that's what I want to be, and as a child, you always you usually want to excel in the things that you get affirmations for, right? So for me, I was strong as a kid. So it was always like, arm wrestling the neighborhood kids, and my dad would always be bragging, "Oh, my son, look how strong he is," so then you really want to excel in those areas. And so I started bodybuilding. I competed, had a successful bodybuilding career at a young age, and then also was mainly known though for being how strong I was, and that's what I got all my attention for. So I really, really dug deep into like the strength lifting.
Yeah, they call you the human crane.
Yeah, I got nicknamed that when I got the cover and the spread, like a 5-page spread in Muscle Fitness, and Irving Gilb was the photographer. And during the photo shoot, he was like, "Let's go really heavy for the camera." And then he was like, "Holy shit."
Yeah, for all you youngins, that's kind of like, we didn't have Instagram, we didn't have Facebook,
No.
there was no MySpace.
No, we had nothing.
So I'm tagging us here.
So back in those days, if you made it into the magazines at all, you were like, you made it,
And then they would clip you out and put you on the wall.
Yeah, put you up on the wall, and everybody, I think
Right next to Pamela Anderson.
yeah, yeah. And the sad part is as male bodybuilders, we're not hanging in any girl's bedroom. We're in all the dudes' garages, right? So, but that was like the thing. You make it in the magazines, you made it, and that's how you knew who was who, is if they made it into those magazines. Mm-hmm. And so started getting those early magazine, exposure, and competed. But I actually had a short-lived personal bodybuilding career. I decided that early on. I had a daughter by the age of 19. I had just turned 19 when my daughter was born, and I dug deep into the business side, of this, and that really forced me at that young age to get serious real quick, right? Like, I'm going to be a father. I'm going to take care of my daughter, and I raised my daughter pretty much by myself. I've had full custody of my daughter since she was born, and I don't think I've been away from her for a single day since then. And so that was the driving force, was like, hey, get serious with this. And I was winning shows, and people would start asking me, and when I originally started Zero Gravity, I started Zero Gravity in 2001. And when I started that first gym, I started out of, I think it was 1,700 square feet. And I took a bunch of money and I borrowed some money from my parents and built this first gym.
How old were you?
I was probably, I was in my early 20s when I opened that first gym.
Okay.
And I'd already been doing personal training, but out of other people's gyms. But I realized at a young age, I never had the personality to work for somebody else. Like, I wanted to do my own thing. I wanted to carve my own path. And so I was fortunate enough to open that small little gym. And I wasn't training bodybuilders mostly then. There was no such thing as like bodybuilding teams, or there was personal trainers, and I had my own little personal training gym, and I trained just a bunch of, average people who wanted to feel better, wanted to be more fit, trained a bunch of housewives, and got everybody in shape. Yeah. And then I had won a competition. When I won the California state show, they did an article in the newspaper, and things started really catching on. And so then competitors would come in, but they were far between. It was like bunch of housewives, and then a pro bodybuilder who wanted to get better for a show. And then it's funny because it was like kind of super organic, it was like I had, basically.
Now describe the word organic. No, describe the word organic because that's important.
I had a passion for doing it.
Yeah.
And to be honest, back then I wasn't making any money. Everybody thinks it was an overnight success,
Okay.
And I tell everybody it took me about 10 years to be an overnight success. And it was grinding. I worked other jobs. I was working private security in nightclubs and all that back in those days, those days. And I was a bouncer. I was all these other things that I needed to do. But those to me those were a job. Those jobs were to support my career.
Yeah.
And I, for many times, was working other jobs to keep the lights on at my gym before it was making enough money to sustain itself. And man, I would work. I'd go every Friday, Saturday night and work at the nightclub, and then be back at the gym, get off at 2 a.m. and back at the gym for my first client at 5 a.m.
And some of your clients were actually part of your employees.
Absolutely. At that point, I'm like, oh man, there's a lot of big dudes that I train. They all need money too. These are going to be the bouncers that work for me in these clubs, right? So started off always trying to find that little niche. And then one show I remember specifically, September 22nd, 2001, they introduced what was called the figure division, which was like, because back then they had fitness and you had to be like a world-class gymnast as a female to compete in that. Mm-hmm. So they decided, let's open it up to a broader audience and the girls that look the part but don't have the gymnastics background. And that first show was in San Diego, and I had 2 girls in that show. Kim Odo, who's one of my mentors and one of the best coaches of all time, legend in this sport. She had like 3 girls in the show. And I decided, because my gym was Zero Gravity, I'm just going to make shirts that say Team Zero Gravity. Mm-hmm. And then Kim was there and he had shirts that Team Body by O. And that started the whole craze. We were like the first 2 teams in bodybuilding.
For the females.
And and I started off with females.
Yeah. Which
is funny because got later in my career more known for coaching males. But again, by fault, it's like I didn't want to. They started this new division, men's physique, and at this time I was coaching a lot of bodybuilders, but there aren't a lot of pro bodybuilders, right? Mm-hmm. They only give out 1 pro card a year in the at the USA Championships every year, so it was a small group of people and very niche. It wasn't mainstream back then, and so when they started this bikini division and the men's physique division, it really took off, the whole team atmosphere, and I started it off with one guy who came to me and said, hey man, I want to compete in this division. And I said, I don't want to do it. He finally gave me the sob story, convinced me to do it. And so I trained him. Uh-huh. And there was some, bad blood there afterwards where like didn't give credit where credit was due. So this guy, Eric Drendel, we know him as Bird, walked into my gym and he had taken 14th place at that same show. He said, man, can you train me? The guy I just coached just won. Mm-hmm. And I said, you know what, come on. So I brought him on, and out of like revenge almost, I said, let's go. I'm going to make sure this other guy never wins again. Mm-hmm. And so I started training Bird, and he goes 6 weeks later and he wins the show. So then people were like, man, this guy went from 14th to 1st since he started working with him.